Don't call me during this lecture. Okay, so before we get into our debate on the governor of Virginia, what else is going on in Black America? Nothing? Y'all just want to hop right into that topic?
Yeah, probation.
What happened with 21 Savage?
He got released.
And so his visa, like they're working on.
Okay, give me a concise answer. 21 Savage got released on bail, released on probation, he was just released, period.
It's on bail.
Yeah.
Okay, and why?
Oh, Jay-Z's lawyer.
Jay-Z's lawyer got him off. Okay, how do we feel about that? Because I'm assuming, I'm just gonna throw a stab at it, it's because he's 21 Savage and not, you know, some other African from the UK, right? So what do y'all feel about that?
He'll figure it out.
You'll figure it out. Anything else going on in Black America? Yes, sir.
So, there's like a controversial thing, like piece of clothing that dropped with Gucci, and so everyone hates Gucci now.
Is it just Amazon who hate Gucci? Oh, by the way, we have a special lecture in 2 weeks on February 28th. We'll have a sitting judge, a practicing attorney, a practicing criminal defense attorney, and a practicing criminal defense / family law / professor at UHD. And we will be discussing the issue in depth about blackface from the perspective of how society looks at Black people and how Black people view themselves. So just mark that in your calendar to come to class anyway on the 28th when we have special lectures. But so let's talk. I was surprised it wasn't one of the first things because did anybody see the Gucci the photo?
Yeah.
How do we feel about it? Let me just ask you guys this. Is this one of those instances where Black people are being too sensitive or they're trying to read into something? Who said that? You know what? I don't care who said it. Why do you think that? No, I mean, I want to know. I always try to see the other side.
Because that's not how I view us. I don't view us looking like that. So for us to view us looking like that, it just means like, is that really how we see each other? When really, it shouldn't be.
Does anybody else have anything to add to what your colleague is saying? Because I think, let me just sum it up and correct me if I'm wrong. You're saying that by having an outrage of this, the blackface image, what you're doing is giving power to it. By saying like we shouldn't look at ourselves like that, so it should just roll off our shoulders.
Yeah, like that's just the image of something. Like it just happens to be of a darker skin tone with red lips and things like that. But if we picture it as us, then like we're making it about us. We shouldn't have to do that. We all know that we're beautiful people, so it shouldn't have to be just that right there.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am.
I'd have to respectfully disagree because, yes, of course we don't view ourselves as that, but the same thing can be said with like derogatory, like racial slurs directed towards Black people. Are we those words? No. But if you say it, we're still, like, we know what you mean by it when you say it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Anything else on Gucci and the blackface model t-shirt turtleneck thing?
He here had some sandals that was in the same like.
We haven't even got to the other brands yet. We gotta hit Prada first too. But let's stay on Gucci for a second.
Her sandals got pulled from shelves because there was a whole blackface.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was cute.
I don't know. It didn't look like blackface to me.
So that is why I asked the question, is this an issue of black people being overly sensitive, trying to read into things.
No, I don't think the Gucci thing. The Gucci, I think that if Katy Perry stuff would have dropped before we just had 2 blackface incidents.
I think it did. Her shoe's been
But
out.
I don't see how you got blackface, man. It's like a cat to me.
Okay. I'm gonna try to,
I have no idea what you're
let me pull it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
When they drop.
It's like a little slip-on shoe. You probably
Have I ever used this before?
I
I
just
just
like Katy Perry.
Okay, y'all share amongst y'all colleagues what the Katy Perry shoe looked like and somebody can get this on.
Yeah, they interesting.
Somebody have a comment back here? Yes, sir.
I think this also could have been a possible publicity stunt because.
From Gucci?
Yeah, well, so I was listening to a podcast and Danny Brown, the rapper, he was talking about that in the past, labels have done sort of like these outrageous things to shift their consumer model. So the point that he made was right now, like Gucci's a heavily black-owned brand, and Gucci's basically trying to shift the model. So that was just their way of creating outrage and shifting their consumer model. Like,
Because it's like, we don't want black
they
people
want,
to.
yeah, exactly. They're trying to basically, oh, we're high end. We don't want to sell to,
That's
not
marketing.
sell, but we also want to be sort of high end. And that's what I got from the podcast. But he was just saying like, there was a jacket that came out like 10 years ago that was like on the back of it was like a minstrel, like from the minstrel shows, and there wasn't. I mean, the same outrage then. It just shifted the consumer base.
It's effective, right? I mean, because you have T.I. who had a call to action, and he's like, let's boycott Gucci for 3 months. So, these are the Katy Perry shoes. Okay, no, not that one. Okay, can somebody hit the lights right quick? I'm sorry, y'all gotta read through this. Okay, so these are the Katy Perry shoes. Someone mentioned they were cute. I mean, had Gucci not done Gucci and Prada not done Prada, would these be an issue? Because I think these have been out for a while. I've never seen them before though. But let's pose this question on these shoes. Is this reading too much into blackface?
I feel like that's Katy Perry.
Yes, it's
Yeah,
so
Yeah, I don't
weird.
like that.
Yeah, she's weird. So.
Okay, wait.
And the Gucci stuff was like over the body, covered the face.
So, okay, I'm glad you guys said, because like that's Katy Perry, that's her attitude. So how do we feel about Quentin Tarantino?
Oh, that's my man.
What'd you just say?
That's my man.
That's your man, right?
That's bomb movies.
He has his black pass, right?
Who's Quentin Tarantino?
Who's Quentin Tarantino?
Django.
Director of Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Inglourious Bastards, Django,
Hateful Eight.
Yeah.
Hateful Eight. But the reason why I mentioned it, because it's notable. I mean, he employs a lot of black people in his film. A lot of people that are recurring in his film. Samuel L. Jackson, as a black actor, but he has been criticized and also praised, not for the use of it, but he has a heavy use of the N-word, right? And so that's why I asked you guys, how do we feel about Quentin? And I'm glad you said that, because that's the thought. Oh, like, that's my man. Oh, he's down. Quentin, who's not black, can use the N-word. So is this like Katy Perry can do this, because that's just Katy Perry? Like, of
It's
course
like
she's
her-
gonna do something
her-
quirky.
Her like fashion sense, not because it's her as a person, but like I feel like all her stuff always has these kind of faces on them and stuff like that. And like her tour merch is a certain type of style, so it's kind of like her style. Not because it's Katy Perry though, as a person.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the Gucci sweater.
I don't see no problem.
They petty, they just took it all off. Okay, here we go.
Yeah, that's terrible.
Wait a minute.
Yeah, see that covers.
Like what was the point?
Like,
Okay, so
like how she don't breathe, it doesn't make sense. Like,
There's just no reason for the.
You could take a regular turtleneck.
Does it come in any
It's
other?
$900.
you say, does it come in any other color?
No.
No, it doesn't. I don't think so. It comes. I think that's just the only. They didn't make any more. Just that color.
I feel like this one's more direct. Like,
Shoes come in
I
any
mean, like in the old cartoons,
Yeah.
like you'll see like the dark characters with red lips like that.
But so your colleague makes an excellent point that I had never thought about. But if you don't want to deal with someone or a certain group of people, what do? You become unavailable to them. You either.
I think they were talking about it goes through 80 people. So basically, to get a product out of like over 80 people have seen that before that's like even came out. So I doubt that it did not come across any person who wasn't of color. I personally believe it was a publicity.
Or not even just not of color. You know, this is European. Oh no, there's color people obviously in Europe, but someone who doesn't know the history of their markets.
Correct.
I mean, because it's not like just saying that this is going, we're producing this and it's going to stay in Europe. We're producing this and this is going to America.
Yeah.
Let me know the history. I mean, you can have a unpaid intern just sitting there like, this is the history of, this image in America that's not going to fly. So that's Gucci. We saw Katy Perry, and then Google knows what they're listening to me. That's what it is. All right, now, are black people being too sensitive over product? That's a charm. I don't know if it comes with the purse or you buy it separately. Right?
Montclair had a jacket too.
Who?
Montclair.
Let's just stay on 3 because it gets to be so many. But so, a monk, it's like a humanoid, I guess. I don't know, but yeah, because it has like a blunt bob cut.
Yeah.
Are we the only culture that have like an animal attached to us?
Not really.
Who else got an animal?
Man, white people came from monkeys, the Caucasus Mountains. That's why they call them.
I think that what your colleague was asking is, are there any other animals in history that have been associated with black people?
Oh, okay. Maybe I took that wrong. Okay.
So I asked this question, is this reaching?
No.
I see somebody could be like, because y'all got sing-songy with the no, so is it?
I mean, what else is it supposed to be?
Yeah.
I mean, no, it's definitely a humanoid monkey thing, but is it reaching to say, oh man, that's racist? Okay. So now that we've seen different variations of blackface, someone hit the light, please. I think I'm gonna start at about 3 o'clock on our Dred Scott lecture because we have some weighty information to get into today. Anybody, please don't let me take all these cookies home. It's not gonna be good for me. So feel free to come up, get your cookies, get your juice. Happy Valentine's Day. Keep my roses, okay? I had to take those from home. All right, so who's my representatives on the Governor Blackface? What is his name?
Ralph Northam.
Who works for Governor Ralph Northam in this room? Okay. All right. Anybody else work for Governor Northam?
Some bias up.
I'll work in the office with you. Okay. You ready for your statement?
Oh Jesus, sorry. I'm sitting up there.
Yes, ma'am.
Wait, this is speaking for him?
Yeah, this is.
Yeah, so the prompt,
On his
to reiterate the prompt, is, what's happened. And also, I just want to say, if y'all heard him say that 20 indentured servants came over in 1619, come on now, like that's on your exam. It's a true or false question. So they were not indentured servants. That's all I'm saying. Okay, but yes, sir.
Is it that he should be like get rehab and keep his job, or is it?
What's your last name?
Just for keeping his job.
Ms. Boudreaux is representing the governor's office, and she's putting out a statement trying to rehabilitate his image. So, in essence, she's not supporting what he did. She is trying to have him keep his job and rehabilitate. Remember, the question last week was, can he be rehabilitated?
I guess I'm sort of both, man.
Yeah, you can. I mean, we'll see what comes out. All right, go ahead.
This is like a short paragraph, so. Okay, on behalf of Virginia Governor Ralph Northam, I am here to defend his reputation and character as an individual in our ever-changing society. As you have all seen, Governor Northam partook in blackface, which is demeaning and racist to the African and African American communities. His actions are extremely frowned upon and has many questioning his authority. Although he participated in an act that is unacceptable, he deserves a second chance to redeem how mature his mindset has developed over the years. Governor Northam might have been raised with racist tendencies, but over time, political views and life experiences has changed his mindset in our society. That's all I got.
Does anybody have questions for his press secretary? So wait, the governor's rehabilitated that quick?
No, we didn't have no question.
I mean, wait, who was against him then? But y'all have no questions? She made the perfect statement. How old are you?
19.
All he had to do was get a 19-year-old from University of Houston to make the statement, and then everybody shuts it down?
I think I'm taking it from her because she's black, so I'm chilling.
So the governor needed a black person to put the statement out to be rehabilitated? I mean, is that what it took? I mean, is that what it would have taken? Yes, ma'am.
How did he come to this level of maturity, and how did he do it so quickly?
I feel like as we get older, we meet new people, and our mindsets change on certain things. So he might have met, like, let's say he sat down with a group of African American individuals, and he realized what he did was wrong in a sense. So he looked back on his actions, and he was like, "Oh, like that's messed up. I'm sorry, y'all." So
You killing it up there. Go ahead.
How has he redeemed himself since the blackface? Like, what has he done to help better minority communities and trying to redeem himself?
Now you may not know
Yeah, I was
this.
gonna say,
You may not know this factually, but you can make something up, and maybe he will see your video and take something out.
he hasn't necessarily redeemed himself yet. He's working towards that point. He is going out. He's going out and interacting with African American communities to better understand their cultures, and
So why does he deserve forgiveness?
everyone deserves forgiveness.
And then I'd be like, no more questions, folks.
Right,
No, I'm
no,
kidding.
that's right.
Yes, ma'am.
How old was he when this happened?
He was 20,
26. He was 26.
like in his 20s. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Also, actually, sort of in defense of your point, they had a new poll that came out today, which was part of mine. 37% of black voters.
Do you want to come up here and be on her press team? Okay, good. Now you got a tag team partner.
37%
Come on,
of voters
tag
in
me
the
out.
Washington Post, black voters, said he should step down. 58% said he should not step down, just because of the fact that he actually does have a strong reputation in the black community. Obviously, the photo is bad and it backfired, but today they posted the actual polls, and there's actually more outrage from the white community that he should step down as opposed to the black community, based on statistics.
Yes, ma'am.
So, and I'm thinking you're right now because you want questions. So you said he grew up in a racist environment, and that he met black people, he changed. So it seems like he has some sort of sheep mentality. So if he were to meet with a member of the KKK, what might change again?
Is this like a known member of the KKK or like a closet racist? Or?
I don't know if you heard, there's a guy by the name of Christian Piccolini. He was a former neo-Nazi, and he's actually changed. He started, I think, a couple foundations. He actually tours with Sean King. One of the big things that he talks about, similar to what Northam is going through, in our country, there's a huge discrepancy in what is taught and what is sort of objective truth. For example, I come from Denver, Colorado. We were taught in our textbooks that the Civil War is about slavery. I've seen numerous textbooks being done in Texas where it's about states' rights. So the lingo has changed.
A is 3348. That was my plug.
So yeah, it has. There's different climates in our country that aren't necessarily driven. If you're born in one area and you're taught something like states' rights as opposed to slavery, there's not really an objective truth in that. So to say if he was meeting someone else, I mean, yeah, if he met someone from the KKK, but he's also met people to get some objective truth that what is going on is wrong. So if you were to talk to someone from the KKK, similar to like when I brought up Christian Piccolini, it took him being around black people to realize, oh wait, no, this is stupid because the objective truth is, these are people just like me, and there is really no excuse for what I'm doing, any switched up.
Yes, but wouldn't you say that one person's wrong could be another person's right? Because like what some people see as wrong isn't like wrong to others, if that makes sense.
Can you elaborate? What do you mean?
Like you were saying, like how he's meeting with people and he learned like what's wrong and what's not, and if he meets with KKK or whatever, they're gonna have a different like idea of what's wrong and what's
Which
right.
goes back to like, that's why I said objectivity. So like, he didn't, Christian Piccolini didn't change because he felt like, oh, you know, this is what I'm around right now. There are some objective truths that can be observed. Okay, well, people who tend to get in groups of hate, they have more issues going on than just, the hate is driven from something else. So, it's, being racist can be an outward thing, especially if you're taught something your entire life, obviously, then you're gonna have those protections and walls built because that's your safe space. You feel, oh well, I was taught this, so it must be true. He's at least being in the public eye where it's being challenged, and in order to it grow anyway, you have to be challenged. If your beliefs aren't challenged, then your beliefs can't stand. So,
Give your classmates a hand. Do we have anybody from the Step Down Right Now committee that want to speak? Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Can we just turn it in for a point? Or?
You can turn it in for a point, but if you want your 2 points,
All right, I'll read mine.
you don't have to stand up. Just like they did. We about equality over here.
Okay. In the CBS This Morning interview, Virginia Governor Ralph Northam said that he will not resign from his position because of what Virginia needs right now. Right now, Virginia needs someone that can heal. There's no better person to do that than a doctor. He went on to say Virginia also needs someone who is strong, who has empathy, who has courage, and who has a moral compass. And that's why I'm not going anywhere. So that was his quote. Then I said, well, Governor Northam, you are not this person. With one of the largest African-American populations in the nation, Virginia needs someone who did not participate in blatantly racist activities as an adult. Virginia needs someone who is strong enough to put their ego aside and step down from their position. Someone who is empathetic and understanding of how people feel after seeing this picture. Virginia needs someone courageous enough to face the consequences of their mistakes, past and present. And if you had any moral compass, it never would have happened. Thank you for understanding what Virginia needs. It is now up to you to resign so that this can happen.
Anybody have questions for Ms. last name?
Myers.
Ms. Myers?
To the individuals who believe Mr. Northam can be forgiven, the values that parents teach their children are immensely important. Governor Ralph Northam's parents obviously did not teach their children about embracing all cultures and people of all colors. This lack of parental guidance led the governor to believe that it was acceptable to dress up as blackface and make fun of African and African American people. Governor Northam's values are evident in this picture of him in school. He is a racist who should resign immediately. This act of racism should not be tolerated nor forgiven. If Governor Northam remains governor of Virginia, then this goes against American values and principles. America should not stand for racism and tolerance. Governor Northam is representing a population of the American people, and as governor, he should resign because his values are not in sync with American values. Governor Northam needs to resign immediately and stop embarrassing the people.
Yes, someone else is gonna join you guys up here. Y'all can wake up, just in case you have questions. Solidarity.
Virginia's Governor Ralph Norton's behavior is inexcusable, and the matter of the issue should not be pushed under the rug. To dismiss it under the notion that it was a long time ago is corrupt. The fact of the matter is, he was a grown adult with a conscious understanding of the social atmosphere. It is one thing to do a dumb thing in your youth, but it is another thing to intentionally mock the struggle of a race for the sake of laughter and giggles. Although it happened in the 80s, people don't really change, especially in regards to how they see race and social structure. To have someone who has done blackface and a Klansman suit in the government office that represents his consciousness, and frankly, undemocratic and shameful. Within the past few years, there are many unveiling of prominent official holders who are involved in underhand and immoral situations, and now we have one more.
Since these officers yield power, they were not held accountable for the full extent of law. This shows the implicit culture of the wealthy. There are people above the law. This begs to ask the question, why are there higher ethical standards for citizens than those who govern those very same citizens?
Thank you, guys. So let me ask you this. Did y'all just like switch on like that perfect statement after listening to the Governor Northam step down crew? Because it's just like y'all, like, yeah, this is right. He should step down. Where are we now? Should he step down or should he stay in office?
Step down.
Step down.
Step down.
We got maybe 2.5 step down. I mean, stay in office.
Like Jimmy Kimmel, there's a huge fallout just from all this. Jimmy Kimmel and Jimmy Fallon, they've all been in blackface. But my question is, would they have to, if he steps down, right? Like, my personal opinion, I think maybe he should step down. Maybe you can't be in a position of power. However, but you also have all these other figures in the public space who dress in blackface. Should they just never work again? Is my question.
What do y'all
there's
think?
A huge fall. Like, there's more like.
I mean, there's a distinction between a maybe not so much, but there is a distinction between a politician and an actor, or it should be for the most part. But let's take away the word power, even though that's one of the themes in this course, and just make it influence. The actor still does have a certain amount of influence. Hell, people on social media are called influencers now, right? When you get like a couple 10,000 or something like that. So, are you saying will people stop going to see Taken 6 or something?
Well, just like if he steps down, right? Obviously, everyone else who's dressed in blackface made any things along the same line. Wouldn't they have to be held to the same standard? So wouldn't they have to be taken? If we're gonna hold him to the standard, and again, a lot of people watch more TV than they watch politics. So they have an influence on their own. So if he has to step down, should everyone else have to step down?
I'm not going to answer the question, but I'll tell you the distinction. So when such and such wears blackface, you can choose whether to follow him or watch his program or not. But when someone in a position of power, someone who has the power to make laws into effect or to veto laws or doing that, that's an entirely different thing. When we talk about states' power, we're talking about things that can be changed as far as healthcare on a state level. We talk about state laws that have historically dealt with discrimination based on sexual orientation, Lawrence versus Texas. So, I mean, even though that was a Supreme Court case, that was from a Texas law that penalized people in homosexual relationships. And in order to have that law that penalized people in homosexual relationships, how did it go through? We're not gonna do Schoolhouse Rock, but it eventually had to land in the governor's desk and be signed into law. So when you think about a person like that having control over its constituents and affecting their daily lives, that's the distinction between Robert Downey Jr. and anyone else who put on blackface. Not that it's acceptable, but if Robert Downey Jr. wears blackface in Tropic Thunder, that's not going to change whether I can be in a relationship with a man or woman. You know what I'm saying? So, yes.
I think white individuals per se are more targeted for like you said, for laughs and giggles, but I feel like all races do it to an extent. So when someone of a white background does something, it's more broadcasted from when like black individuals make fun of like white culture.
Like white chicks.
Yeah.
I think they were recently talking about that because they're coming out with a White Chicks too. And they said something about, they asked, I think one of the Wayans brothers, like, what's the difference between you dressing up in whiteface and then white people dressing up
So
in
like,
blackface?
if we're talking about equality, then
That's crazy.
why aren't black people held to the same standard?
Because there's no historical backing for that.
Okay, so excellent segue because I don't want to get too far off. The whole thing is about how people are viewed, right? And the it's bigger than that. It's about history. So, I don't remember slaves dressing up in whiteface. If they could, I'm pretty sure they would. You know why? To escape. So, I mean, it just makes sense, right? But, you know, you didn't have white people wanting to dress up as blackface because they wanted to blend in, unless you were that person, whatever her name was, whatever her name is. But you don't have a history of white people dressing up as black people because they want to fit in, but it was to do it in jest, right? Because when you look at even the Dred Scott case, this wasn't the best segue, but black people, you know, they like to say that, you know, we're treated as second-class citizens. No, you weren't. You don't even get that. You're treated as property. Like, you're treated like less than the Gucci belt, less than the sweater that just came out. So when you look at why white chicks could be different from people dressing up as like in blackface, it's because there is no historical implications of white people or black people doing it to tease white people. I haven't seen it. If you guys want to Google and try to find me a picture in the interim, that's fine. But moving on to Dred Scott. The last thing we talked about in class last week was the Missouri Compromise. I really took my time doing this map. This is probably one of the best maps that I've done since teaching this class. I had a picture up and I tried to do it. But so, remember, Missouri Compromise of 1820 states that nothing over this line, this 3630 parallel, can have slavery, right? So it's like the territories, because before they become states, they're territories, and anything else the United States acquire, nothing can have slavery. So you have the green, which is the free states, most of the colonies, or most of the early colonies. And then the red is the slave states. Blue is the territories from the Northwest Territory of 1787 that says no slavery in the territories. This red above the line was the exception to the rules. That's the state of Missouri, right? So in 1820, when the Missouri Compromise was passed, in a way to have a compromise, right? We're always trying to compromise anti-slavery and pro-slavery efforts. Congress said, okay, we're going to draw a line and say no slavery over this line except the state of Missouri, which we're admitting as a slave state. And then we'll admit Maine as a free state. So we can have equal representation in Congress. Obviously the Senate, because you have the House of Representatives based on how many people are in your state. So we have the Missouri Compromise of 1820, and then we move along to this mass production of slaves. 12 years, can't count. Yes, 12 years before Missouri Compromise of 1820, we have the 1808 clause, which did what? Which said what? Your exam is next week. What did the 1808 clause do? Okay, boom. Say it again.
It prohibited slave masters from importing slaves to America.
And what was the exception to that rule? What was the penalty?
$5 to $10 per day.
Right. And when was the 1808 clause passed? In 17 something. In 1787 when the Constitution was adopted. So what they're saying is for 21 more years, we are going to allow you guys to import slaves. But in 1808, we're done. Y'all can't bring in any more slaves. So if you cannot bring in any more slaves, if you can't import them into the United States of America, how does the slavery population grow?
Little breed.
You say chattel slavery. What did you say? What'd you say? Okay, the slaves, that they're impregnating them, and you know they're breeding slave children, because it's not like they had children and said, you know what, you're half mine, you know, let's go into that. No. So you have children who grew up as slaves, and then you just have the natural progression of life. You know, you have slaves getting married and wanting their own children. Unfortunately, those children became slaves too. So you have an increase in the slave population, even though the 1808 clause says no importation of slaves. With an increase in the slave population, you also have the introduction of the Underground Railroad, and you have slaves escaping to the north for freedom. And so what we had before that was the Fugitive Slave Clause that stated that anybody who runs away, they use the word fugitive, they can be brought back to their masters. And then you have the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. This is my rundown over the last 3-4 weeks, that states that in order to reclaim this slave, all you need is an oath or affirmation. And if you were caught helping, then you would be fined $500, which I said was what, about $30,000, $15,000 in this day and age? Yes, sir.
And then you were saying just the clause gives the right and the law the mechanism, right?
Right. So remember, if it's not in the Constitution, then Congress cannot do it. Article 1, Section 8 lists every single thing that Congress can do. But they can't say it word for word what they would do. And I give the example of Congress has the right to make rules of naturalization. What does naturalization mean? Who can become a citizen, who can get their visa, who can get their green card. The Constitution is not going to hold every single requirement for to do that. So what they do, they created the Immigration and Nationality Act that shows you the rules that you need to become a citizen of the United States, to become a green card holder, to get A through Z visas. Yes, sir.
So you said if it's not in the Constitution, Congress can't do it, right?
Right.
So the Supreme Court, how can they do judicial review if it's not in the Constitution? How can they just get
Well, the Supreme Court is not Congress, and Article 3 gives the Supreme Courts their powers, and they do have the power to review federal. They have the power to review federal law and state law under certain exceptions, and that's how we get to the third Dred Scott case. Okay. So, did I answer your question thoroughly, or did I just gloss over it? What? Ask me to clarify. What do you need clarification on?
So the Supreme Court, I thought they like gave themselves the power of judicial review, that it wasn't clearly stated in the Constitution that they had judicial review.
What do you mean they gave themselves power?
Like they just said one day, like, oh, we got judicial review, basically.
The power to review laws? Let me pull up Article 3. Because the Supreme Court reviewing a law like the Missouri Compromise, I haven't gotten to this since I have talked twice a week, because you guys would have been learning about Marbury versus Madison all over again, and that takes away from African Americans in the law. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, i.e. Missouri Compromise, and treaties made of which shall be under their authority. And then they give you all other cases that the judicial power, that the Supreme Court can review, okay? So, that was the issue of Marbury versus Madison. You guys are making me tell you guys this story. Long story short, the reason why the Supreme Court struck down a law of Congress, because this case is going to be the second law they struck down. The reason why they struck down a law of Congress is because someone tried to go from A to Z, meaning that instead of going to a certain court to hear the case, they went straight to the Supreme Court. That's just like, you skipping over the first source and going straight to the head source. But the law tells you in the Constitution what cases the Supreme Court can hear, and you can't hear that type of case. Did I just confuse everybody? Okay, so don't worry about Marbury versus Madison. I'm going back to Dred Scott. So in the Dred Scott case, we're still dealing with our themes of money and power. And what this case breaks down is 3 questions. Number 1, can a slave sue? Number 2, is that law over there putting that imaginary line and saying no slavery above that line, say for Missouri, is it constitutional? And then number 3, can Congress, the people who made that imaginary line, deprive slave owners of their property? And the reason why I asked that question is because I'm pretty sure you guys all heard of, you have a right to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. That's the Declaration of Independence. But you have a right to property, or your property cannot be deprived unless you have due process of law. So think of it like this. You are driving your car in Texas and you want to go to Coshada, right, in Louisiana. And as soon as you cross that Louisiana-Texas state line, the state trooper pulls you over and orders you out the car. It happens, it's I-10, right? But they order you out the car, and you're like, officer, have I done anything wrong? And they just say, we can't have cars private citizens can't have cars in Louisiana. How do you guys feel about that? So they take your car, and you just kind of never get your car back. Not like, okay, I'll just cross back over and go back to Texas. They're like, okay, you go back to Texas, but we're keeping your car. You said it's robbery? How do you think the slave owners feel? The federal government robbed these slave owners of their property just because they wanted to go chill out in present day Wisconsin. Got too hot in Texas. They're like, we're going to Wisconsin. We know Green Bay will be here soon. So they go up there. And the law at the time says there's no slavery in the territories, right? And so all their slaves are like, bye. That's number 3. Can Congress deprive slave owners of their property? Because what happens? Like, let's say, not that you want to go up there because of better climate, but your family's just like, we're going up there to Wisconsin because, you know, they're forming a state soon, and I know that we're going to have better bang for our buck in terms of property. You're like, but I got slaves down here. You are forced to literally stay here, right? Because you don't want to lose your slaves. Like, you know, you want to go to Coshada. You want to go gamble. You prefer to take your car so you can, you know, travel back and forth when you want to. You don't want to go on Megabus, but you go on Megabus, right? Because if you go to Coshada in your car, they're going to take your car. So what does it do? Let's just say there was no Megabus. There's only feet in your car. You are restricted from traveling. They're depriving you of your rights. Y'all didn't like that analogy though, did you? But that's how they're thinking of it in the 1800s. Not like that black people are human and, you know, this is an abomination. No, you are restricting me of my right to have slaves. You're trying to deprive me of my property by keeping me here. Now, let's take away the scenario of trying to get away for a better climate and put it into something more realistic. Do I have any military children here? Military families? Okay. How many high schools did you go to? 2? Were they all like in the same city, state?
Carolina.
Did your parents have a choice on where they're going? That's Dr. Emerson. That's Dr. Emerson and Dred Scott. So, in Dred Scott's case, Scott was a slave. He was born in Virginia. He was eventually sold to Dr. Emerson, who was a surgeon in the Army. And Emerson lived in Missouri in the 1830s. As you know, in 1820, Missouri was admitted to the Union as a slave state. And so Emerson, because he's in the Army and he does not get the opportunity like your colleague moved from North Carolina, and where else did you go to school? In Texas. The U.S. Army sent him to, I think first it was Illinois, which at the time Illinois was a free state, not a territory. Illinois is a free state. So sent him to Illinois, he did whatever he did on base, and then he went back to Missouri. Then he went to Wisconsin, which was a territory. Remember, territories, no slave. Territories are free. That's why I put it in blue. So he goes to Wisconsin and he works, and he takes Dred with him every time he leaves. And so after a while, he leaves Dred Scott in Wisconsin territories, and he goes to Louisiana, I don't know, vacation, and he marries someone named Eliza Sanford, which is how we get Dred Scott versus Sanford, even though it was her brother John Sanford. So he marries Eliza Sanford, and Eliza's like, we need help. And so he sends for his slaves. By this time, Dred Scott is married in the Wisconsin territory, and he has a child, and his wife is pregnant. He goes down, and his wife has a baby sometime within the territories. So the child is born free, allegedly, seemingly, and they come to Louisiana, right? And so at that time in Louisiana, you have Dr. Emerson, his new bride, Eliza, and Dred Scott's family. Dred Scott and his wife, who were slaves, one child who was a slave, and then a child that was born into freedom because they were born in a territory. Eventually, the family moved back to Missouri, and Dred Scott's master, Dr. Emerson, dies. And like all of our stories in African Americans in the law, Someone was either promised freedom, or they overheard it, or they tried to sue for freedom, like Dred Scott. So he sues Eliza for he sues Eliza for freedom, and he loses. But before we get to that, because this is the very big part of our first case with Dred Scott, Eliza leases the Scotts. I don't know why she leased them. Maybe she didn't have that much work to do in the house. Maybe she could have used the extra money, but you got the Simpsons across the street, and they're like, we could use extra labor. So she leased their service. She's like, cool, you can use my slave at $10 an hour. Lease the service to them, right? And so eventually Scott sues for freedom. He sues Eliza, and this is case 1. He sues Eliza for freedom and he loses. Does anybody know why? He loses because, and this is the crazy thing, he could not prove that he was a slave of Eliza. That's the issue of standing. So, he files this lawsuit. He's like, I'm Dred Scott. I'm a slave of Eliza. They took me to a free territory, and based on precedent means prior cases. Look up Rachel and look up Winnie, that's on your blackboard. The Rachel and Winnie cases pretty much stated that same set of facts. You have a slave that's here in Missouri, goes into the territory, the free territories with her master who was in the army. She goes back to Missouri, sues for freedom, wins. Missouri Supreme Court at the time is just like, look, you kind of forfeited your rights to that slave when you took them to freedom, right? Much like if you took your car to Louisiana, you forfeit that car when you take it over. Dred Scott was like, okay, I'm about to use the same argument they used in Rachel about 20 years prior. Cool, we got it. But in order to sue, he had to prove that he had standing, meaning that he could bring the suit, that he was a slave. How you gonna sue to be released from slavery and you can't even prove that you were that person's slave? That's what the court said. That because Scott could not prove that he was Eliza's slave, then he lost due to a technicality. When people don't want you to win, they'll find a way. Everybody clear on Scott case number 1 and why he lost? Okay. Second case is Scott versus John Sanford. Why are we suing John Sanford and not Eliza? Because Eliza got tired. And so she said, here, brother, happy birthday, here's my slaves, right? And so John Sanford lives in New York. He's a citizen of New York. And Scott is a citizen of Missouri. This is the big part that I want you guys to write down. Can Scott sue? That's the big thing in this case. Nothing else really matters. Whenever you bring a lawsuit, you have to figure out first, do you have standing to sue? You guys know that I'm a family law attorney, right? So I do all kinds of family law cases, custody, child support, divorce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Let me put it into perspective about standing to sue. So you have a mother and a father, right? The mother, you obviously know that that's her biological child because she gave birth. You know that the father is a biological father because he got a paternity test and it came back as 99.999, whatever. But let's just say the father dies and his best friend wants to sue for custody. Custody for what? Like custody to do what? He's just like, oh man, I know that John always wanted children, and so I want to make sure that that child has, a good father in his life. What kind of standing do you have to bring suit to sue to be that child's other parent? You see what I'm saying? It's a random person. Now, the law does allow some people to sue for, we don't say custody, conservatorship, but you have to have standing. You have to have the ability to bring that lawsuit. If you guys were walking across the street, right, and you saw someone get hit by a car and you got shot, and then you wanted to sue the person who hit the person in the car, and you just like, oh my God, I'm suing. Why? Because, it frightened me. Where's your standing? You're not the person who got injured. You're not the person who caused the accident. You're inserting yourself into the suit. In Scott's case, what the court should have decided was, does Scott have the ability to even bring a lawsuit, right? Because in this case, they took it to federal court. They weren't playing with Missouri anymore. They took it to federal court, and in federal court, under diversity jurisdiction, you can only bring a suit there if the amount in controversy is a certain amount. Don't worry about that. What I want you to worry about for the purpose of this class is you gotta be citizens, not people, but citizens of 2 different states. So you have Sanford, who was a citizen of New York, and you have Scott, who was allegedly a citizen of Missouri. So what the court should have just said is, slaves cannot be citizens. I am dismissing this lawsuit. Much like John's best friend who wants to sue for custody, you're not a father, you're not a brother, you're not a grandparent, you're not a cousin, you're not any of the people that's on the list who can bring a lawsuit for custody. I'm dismissing the lawsuit. That's what they should have did with Dred Scott case. That's not what happened. So in Dred Scott's case, what they did was the Chief Justice who wrote the opinion, they went through several reasons why African Americans were not citizens. This is exam material, write this down, but it is on your blackboard and in the PowerPoint lecture. So, in the 1800s, opinions were much longer than what they are now. They had a lot of time on their hands. So they spent a lot of time thinking, speaking, and writing. And so instead of just saying that Dred Scott is a slave, slaves don't have rights, slaves are citizens, slaves are property, goodbye, they said, let me just tell you. Dred Scott's lawyers are giving certain types of arguments on why Dred Scott should be free, on why he is a citizen, right? And the lawyers for Mr. Sanford said, none of this applies. You want to use the Native American argument. So how are Native Americans treated differently than Africans at the time? And what the court said was, although both races are uncivilized, the Indians' territory is recognized as an occupancy. And they have some limited form of government that's recognized by the United States. So first, what they did to say that blacks will never be citizens is to compare them to Native Americans. Then they compared how blacks were viewed to the English. So you remember one of our first cases, Somerset versus Walker. In that case, he was taken to England by his master, and then at the time, it was at 1772, England was like, yeah, no, we don't recognize slavery here anymore. I know y'all do that in the 13 colonies, but we don't recognize that here, so we're just going to free him, right? But before that, obviously, Great Britain recognized slavery. So what the Supreme Court said was England engaged heavily in the slave trade and regarded the slaves as property, capturing them from the African coast and selling them where they could make a profit. So they're saying even though it did not eventually work for England, initially they thought of Africans as property and making a profit. Then they trickled down to how they were looked at in the 13 colonies. And because I imagine Dred Scott's lawyer said, well, same thing that Mumbet lawyer was saying, well, all men are created free and equal, and the Declaration of Independence say that, you know, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, right? And so what the Supreme Court said in response to the 13 colonies argument was like, yeah, I know the Declaration of Independence say that all men are created equal, but come on. These were like the best white scholars of our country. Of course they're not talking about the black people. Like, how dare you insult them to think that our best white scholars were referring to black people as well? So then you have the lawyers arguing, okay, well, what about in the United States Constitution? How were they viewed then? And so the Chief Justice was like, okay, this is easy. If we cared about Africans at the time, we would not have created the 1808 clause, giving you 21 additional years of importation. We would not have created the 3/5 compromise, which stated for every 5 black people, only 3 of them will be counted. And we would not have created the fugitive slave clause saying, if they run away, they'll be returned because that's your property. So no, even the framers of our United States Constitution did not regard black people as citizens. Last thing they said was, these are the lawyers for Dred Scott just pleading to the court. Well, look, the North has gotten rid of slavery, so obviously they recognize some kind of social and legal importance of black people. And the court was like, okay, this is not as easy as, pointing out the Constitutional Declaration of Independence, but the only reason why the North got rid of slaves is because they didn't really need them. Like, we didn't need the mass production of people. They didn't need all those people. We're dealing with the Irish and the Italians coming over, so we don't need, field labor. That's the only reason why they got rid of black people. Not because they respected, not got rid of, but that's the only reason why they abolished slavery. Not because they respected them, they just didn't need the labor force like they do in the South. So, after going through the Native Americans, how England looked at black people, how they were viewed in 13 colonies, Declaration of Independence, U.S. Constitution, they said, after all that together, we're just gonna have to say that persons of African descent will not only not ever be citizens of the United States, but we don't believe that they're citizens of the United States and they do not have standing to sue in this case. So this freedom that you're suing for, I can't hear your case because you can't even bring this into court. You're a slave. You're not a citizen. So they dismissed that suit. And then they answered other questions. They were just like, because the lawyer for Sanford was like, and what about that Missouri Compromise that take away our slaves if we go above that imaginary line? They're like, oh, okay, yeah. No, we're gonna strike that law down too. That's not constitutional. Congress can't deprive you of your property without due process. As a matter of fact, Congress, you can't stop the slave owners from going over this line into the free territories with their property. You just take in their car when they cross the Texas-Louisiana border. Happy Valentine's Day. Any questions about Dred Scott? It's a hard case. This is considered the worst case in the history of the United States. And can you see why? Like, if you guys have the attention span, and I say attention span because they are using some really wordy language to go over why black people are not, why slaves were not citizens. It almost just seems like it's all already contradictory. A slave as a citizen, that makes zero sense. And so you didn't get your citizenship as black people until 1868 under the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. So somebody always asks this, and I finally have the answer today. This is my 12th time teaching this lecture. And they said, well, was Dred Scott ever free? Mm-hmm. But he was only free for a year, and he was only free because I think he didn't sue for it. Maybe he paid her off. I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't through not this case. He went back to slavery, but then he was eventually freed, and yeah, then he died after a year. But so he never. So this was 1857. So in 1858, so he never got to see the Civil War, and he never got to see the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and your Reconstruction Amendments passed. So, and I think this case started in 1842 when he first sued. So in 1857 when he got the final no from the Supreme Court. So 15 years of legal battles and in slavery. Any questions about Dred Scott? Any lifelong questions? Anything? This is the last lecture before your first exam, and it will cover the Dred Scott case, your your constitutional amendments dealing with slavery, the 1808 clause, 3/5 compromise, and the Fugitive Slave Clause. It will cover the Fugitive Slave Law of 1793, the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. It will cover the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, which is on your blackboard. We did not discuss it, but it's on your blackboard. Mumbet, Quackwalker, Somerset, Creek versus Pennsylvania, personal liberty laws. Am I missing something? I believe that's it. I'm thinking about hosting an exam review Monday at my office or sometime next week at my office. If you are I'm gonna put it on the blackboard. I gotta find a date that I'm available. But if you are unable to make it, I will stream it live, or I'll probably do what I've done when I did an exam review, like going over the exam afterwards. I'll just make the video, and you guys will be uploaded to YouTube or something, and I'll include the link. Okay? If you have written your press release statement for the governor of Virginia, please write your name here, whether you typed it and you emailed it or you have it written. And that's all. Y'all enjoy your holiday, and the exam will be next week. It'll be next Thursday, so don't come to class, okay? Oh, and please take the cookies and brownies. Yeah. Yeah. And thank you for everyone who participated in the What's Going On America segment, whether you were just here listening or you debated, et cetera, et cetera. You need a pen?
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry? You were playing spades in my class. You admitted to it. I think that you will have other opportunities. Uh-huh. Oh, you just write your name on the,
So if you read, you get 2 points.
it's 2 points. Oh, and I don't even, if y'all had on red, y'all should. Hey. See, I'm not gonna remind you guys on how to get your money. That's what I'm saying. Hey.
So I need to.
So do we put our name on there just for everything?
So you would get 3 points. So put your name into the power of 3 then. Or put the
Yeah,
like third
got
power.
you.
That makes sense.
I'm gonna put that in a check mark.
Just like yours. So you will get 2 points. Because I'm looking at your paper that you have. Is that your paper? Okay, so you have a paper and you have on red.
I actually do mine with
Yeah,
points
yeah.
of professor giving it to him to say.
Did somebody? Okay. Did somebody take my pen?
Also, I sent you an email on
That was you?
Yes.
Okay. So my February is a really horrible month as far as trial mediation. So I'm trying to work out those days to see when it's 7:30. You don't remember it's 7 o'clock? But no, I'll do it. Let me just figure out which days work better. I'll try to reply to you either today or tomorrow.
All right, no problem.
Professor,
Yes, sir.
my favorite fish Valentine's, 6 days Valentine's Day.
It's called what?
I called him Valentine, but it's just
Aw.
a regular, since he was pink and red.
That's nice. Thank you. You're not getting an extra point for that though.
Oh, no, I'm just, no, I'm more red, that's all I need, my 1 good point.
So you said the test will be on Thursday, right?
On Thursday, yeah, I'm gonna reiterate.
Yeah, I've been doing some.
Same to you. Nobody like the brownies? I'm just gonna leave it outside. I'm taking that home.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
You said you did family law?